Too late. This topic is not being raised rigorously enough and without the proper political emphasis. The Russian police must act so that they do not have the slightest illusion of power or superiority, so that they do not feel themselves masters and do not try to impose their orders. Something strange is happening between Russia and Azerbaijan. In one moment, a diplomatic scandal, searches in Sputnik's office, cancellation of all Russian events, and all this against the background of the events in Yekaterinburg, about which the Kremlin is trying to talk as quietly as possible. How will the conflict with Armenia and Azerbaijan end for Putin? Why is American President Donald Trump now actively helping the Kremlin leader? About this and not only talk in this stream. My name is Anastasia, and with me is Sergei Aslanyan, the host of Khodorkovsky Live. Sergei, hello, nice to welcome you. Hello. Putting an equal sign between Armenia and Azerbaijan in one sentence is a dream of many people, but it is far from reality. Let's talk about it. Friends, be sure to write comments, indicate from which country and city you are watching us, and don't forget to give this video a like. A serious scandal has erupted between Moscow and Baku. It started after the FSB arrested Azerbaijanis in Yekaterinburg, who according to the official version were suspected of a series of murders and assassination attempts committed back in 2001. Almost 50 people from the diaspora were detained, and 2 of them were killed. Their relatives claim that Russian security forces severely beat and tortured the detainees, resulting in their deaths. Azerbaijan responded by searching Sputnik Azerbaijan offices, detaining alleged FSB agents and summoning the Russian ambassador to the foreign ministry. Sergei, how serious is this situation, and what could be its consequences for Russia and personally for Putin? Azerbaijani planes were shot down, but nothing happened after that. Everything was quickly forgotten. Even 2 Azerbaijanis who were beaten to death in the stocks will be forgotten in a few days. Azerbaijan remembers it, but Russia does not. Russia continues its unchanging policy that has been maintained for centuries. It never admits guilt, considers itself entitled to decide who lives and who dies, who will be a colony and who will be a metropolis, who will be rewarded and who will be destroyed. If someone was killed somewhere, or, as in the case of Ukraine, Russia started a war, it is not for Ukrainians or Azerbaijanis to decide, it is Russia that considers itself entitled to dictate conditions. In this case, the turn has come to the Azerbaijanis. This is a soft version of what is happening, with no apparent reason. What happened is a chain of accidents, which the Azerbaijani side immediately raised to a high level. The first serious episode that requires geopolitical consideration is the downed airplane. It is not an accident or an unfortunate mistake that a person was injured and then died in another country, in Kazakhstan. This is an interstate problem for which Russia was obliged to apologize, to pay full compensation to the Republic of Azerbaijan and to each family of the deceased. All the relatives who were left without relatives, without friends, without support, are the victims, and they should have received an apology, compensation, and admission of guilt from Russia. But Russia is not apologizing. In its logic, the highest form of reward is no punishment. Consider yourself lucky if no tanks or nuclear warheads fall on you. The message is one of contempt. Who you are not worthy, you are not equal. Russia is equally contemptuous of everyone who does not belong to the titular nation. It is a class state, especially in its current form. The boss is a figure of absolute power. He orders lives. In Russian culture, the head of the collective farm has always been a czar. The chairman of the city executive committee has always been a czar. The current president is a czar. Any minister is a czar. Any governor is also a czar. In a class society at the regional level, he has his own elite. The elite are the strongmen. These are not professors, not people of art, not librarians. This is its own investigative committee, prosecutor's office, FSB, and other levers of power. The essence of power in Russia is suppression, destruction, and control. It is impossible to imagine a governor who plants flowers and proposes to lower utility rates, introduce free transportation, or distribute social bread. The governor is a holdover who has been given a region to squeeze every last bit of money out of it. The usual redistribution of financial flows has taken place in Yekaterinburg. There were several new figures in power, and they needed to subordinate all those who provide financial flows. The governor is the main beneficiary. He owns all the business in the region. He receives income from kickbacks, from factories, from road repairs and construction, from the private sector, from markets. There is not a single entrepreneur or enterprise in the region that is not subject to tribute, and the tribute is levied repeatedly to the governor, to law enforcement agencies, to controlling bodies. For example, sanitary supervision demands one thing, tax authorities demand another. When the tax authorities come, they immediately name the amount, 2 or 3 million. If you don't pay, they will find violations and add on top. You have to negotiate in any case, regardless of the scale of the business, whether it is a beer stall or an ice cream factory. Prices are set in such a way that they are unaffordable for most people. In this context, conflicts are frequent in Russia because the exorbitant tribute taxation makes normal work impossible. People are forced to look for workarounds, and some of them lead to violence. They have to hire hitmen, eliminate competitors, go into hiding, and move under various roofs. Chechens, who have their own rules and a tough business environment, are often involved in such schemes. In Yekaterinburg, there was an urgent need to redistribute financial flows. When we turned to the Armenian diaspora, they agreed to the new order. The Tajik and Uzbek diasporas also agreed. The Roma promised to keep quiet and pay as much as necessary, but it was not possible to reach an agreement with the Azerbaijani diaspora. And then, on behalf of the governor, a person unknown to the general public, without a name, without a surname, but with authority, intervened. He decided that he can act boldly because he feels patronized. He considers himself close to the main man in Yekaterinburg and is sure that he is allowed to do anything. He started to behave accordingly. In the Russian system, the police look at everyone as a herd that needs to be sheared and sometimes milked. They don't need to explain. A command is enough. The order FAS is executed with enthusiasm. This also applies to future events connected with the Chechen diaspora, especially against the background of Ramzan Kadyrov's problems. It is easy to recall examples of violence in Russian history, from Jewish pogroms to the persecution of Georgians during the Abkhazian War. In 2008, there were punitive sweeps, just as in the years of mass deportations when Chechens were evicted. Now Georgians are under attack, regardless of where they live. And now the turn has come to Azerbaijanis. This is an attempt to show who is in power here. There is no one in the Russian police who would refuse to beat to death anyone who is considered a stranger. With the exception of Americans and Europeans, everyone else in Russia is considered second-class citizens. The Americans are almost demigods. Autographs are taken from them. Chewing gum from the French. Chewing gum is shared by three. Cologne is shared by something special. They are seen as something special. Azerbaijanis are beaten to death in the same way Russians are often beaten to death. In Russia, it is considered the norm. Because violence against their own is a commonplace. Neighbors complained that the husband was beating his wife. Neighbors complained that the husband was beating his wife. And in the morning they returned the corpse. Took the man away because he was beaten. And in the morning they returned the corpse. Surprise anyone. Because he'd been beaten. But when the national factor is added, the idea of ethnic superiority comes into play. The idea of ethnic superiority comes into play. This is explicitly stated on federal should be the main one, where they claim that representatives of other peoples have no rights, claiming that representatives of other peoples have no rights, destroyed, and should be women and children were not completely annihilated. Already they say women and children were not of magnanimity. Already Azerbaijan, which even after the incident with Azerbaijan received neither apologies nor expressions of sympathy, was left without the slightest sign of respect, not the slightest sign of regret. They'll hit you if they have to. The reason does not matter. In this case, they were detained on the charge that in 1863, two Azerbaijanis allegedly stole a bull somewhere within Russia or cheated someone at the market. That is enough for a raid. In Russia, reason is not required. You don't need a reason to be an outcast, to have your house broken into at 5 in the morning, your door kicked in, beaten to death, or sent to prison forever. It's just bad luck. Someone was in the wrong place at the wrong time. No one pursued a special goal by beating up two Azerbaijanis. That's how the system works. One's own people are beaten up too. This happens under any interior minister. Khodorkovsky began his leadership with a similar case. In St. Petersburg, a police officer was celebrating his birthday, drank, went out on the porch. A schoolboy, Nikita Leontiev, was passing by. He was 16 or 17 years old. He was dragged into the station and beaten to death.
Никита и Леонтьев. Ему 16 лет было, 17. Его затащили в полицейский участок и забили насмерть.
Just because it was a holiday and someone wanted to beat a person to death. For some police officers, it has become a way of celebrating. Such behavior is perceived as the norm. Instead of turning this case into a cleansing story with serious consequences, the police officer was fired after a while and neatly put away for a couple of years. A criminal case was opened against Nikita Leontiev, the teenager who was beaten to death, for allegedly robbing a homeless woman, stealing a Bentley, or stealing a gold toilet bowl. The charges were absurd, but it helped justify the violence. Minister Khodorkovsky began his career with this very case. He had the opportunity to change the image of the police, to carry out another reform, to work with personnel, but nothing changed. The Russian police know rare examples when something resembling justice happened, when they were not always beaten to death. But these are exceptions, not the rule.
Так или иначе провести 125-ю за последнюю неделю реформу полиции. Можно было поработать с людьми, можно было многое сделать. И российская полиция, она ведь знает примеры, когда там вдруг что-то происходило человекообразное, когда не всегда забивали насмерть.
Now it has become the norm to beat to death your own, an Azerbaijani, a Chechen, anyone, especially if there is money behind it. They see nothing unusual in this. But only Azerbaijanis stood up for their own. Only they raised a ruckus, brought the situation to the highest level, reacted in a mirror-like and quick manner. However, their response also turned out to be controversial. It is one thing to shut down a propaganda resource like Russia Today, and quite another to detain those who fled to Azerbaijan from Putin's regime. These 8 beaten men were not agents, but people who refused to go to war, who did not want to kill Ukrainians. They should have been given protection. These are the kind of people Azerbaijanis should have recognized as their own, because they are those who believe in Azerbaijan and seek refuge in it.
мы отвечаем, потому что русские били наших, мы бьем русских. Но эти 8 парней – это те, кто сбежал от Путина, от армии. Это те, кто не хотел идти убивать украинцев. И они должны были оказаться под защитой азербайджанцев. Они должны были как раз оказаться людьми, которых очень точно азербайджанцы понимают, что это точно свои. Это как раз те, кто в Азербайджан верит максимально.
They did not run to Georgia, Armenia, or Uzbekistan, although they could have found understanding there as well. They chose Azerbaijan, not by chance because they perceive it as the closest possible ally. They are their own. Such Russians should be protected, not beaten up and imprisoned on far-fetched grounds, be it running a red light, accusations of drugs, or even keeping a nuclear warhead under the bed. This is the same indiscriminateness demonstrated by the Russian side, where beating anyone to death is not a problem. In this case, Azerbaijanis have suffered, and Azerbaijan is rightly trying to protect its own. Russia is not used to stand up for its own, because it considers them expendable. This became a reason for a conflict between the Kremlin and Baku, and now there are already questions to the president of Azerbaijan, because the situation has moved to the level of personal quarrels. Yours have suffered, mine have suffered, you hit, I can answer. But the conversation is already conducted at the level of persons of czarist scale. We have something to share because we always see geopolitics in everything. From this springboard, the problem immediately went to the highest level, where it will now fluctuate for some time, but is unlikely to lead to concrete results. Azerbaijan cannot seriously oppose Russia, just as Russia cannot really influence Azerbaijan. It is not by chance that Armenia is mentioned in this context, where serious issues are now being discussed. Armenia is leaving Russia's influence. Azerbaijan has already left. It has been closed by Turkey and has become inaccessible for pressure. Russia can try to insult, humiliate, harm, but it cannot change the situation. It no longer influences the processes in Azerbaijan. It is an observer. Azerbaijanis continue to come to Russia, work, earn, develop markets and diasporas. This is a stable presence. Russia has nothing like that in Azerbaijan, except for an intelligence network and agents. В отличие от России, которая в Азербайджане ничего подобного не имеет. Вот разведывательную сеть, агентуру, да, Россия имеет. People from Russia do not go to live in Azerbaijan, do not seek to settle there, and Russia's influence in the region is minimal. Moscow has no levers of pressure on Azerbaijan. Armenia is also spinning out of control. Georgia has failed to return, while Armenia has declared its desire for European integration. For the first time in history, it signed a treaty with Azerbaijan, in which it officially recognized the absence of territorial claims. This was the final point in the long-standing conflict over Karabakh. Nikol Pashinyan has not been forgiven for this. The Armenian society perceives his steps as a betrayal, especially considering that Azerbaijan and Turkey, in the Armenian perception, are one and the same. Regardless of their national differences, they are called by one word, Turks. Signing an agreement with them and recognizing the absence of claims means, in the opinion of many Armenians, betraying national interests. Договориться и признать отсутствие территориальных претензий недопустимо это предательство национальных интересов. This is important because a country that has no territorial disputes can be considered a candidate for the EU. If there are such disputes as Ukraine has with Russia, the path to integration becomes more difficult. Russia created these disputes to make it difficult for Ukraine to move. Armenia has no such disputes now. Armenia held a referendum where the population expressed its desire to join the EU. To do so, it had to agree with Azerbaijan to end territorial claims. Despite internal resistance, the society agreed. This paves the way for an application for accession, and the EU is likely to accept it. Armenia will receive candidate status, which is highly undesirable for Russia. At the same time, Russia cannot influence Azerbaijan. The current conflict will not improve relations and will not fix the already spoiled ones, but it will give Russia an opportunity to show off a little, threaten and teach life lessons. However, Azerbaijan will not tolerate it. It acts more cautiously and intelligently.
Он даже не исправит ухудшенные отношения. Но он позволит России какое-то время еще покрасоваться, погорцевать, побряцать, поугрожать и поучить жизни. Слушай, ты Азербайджан, ты кто такой, чтобы меня учить? Вах! Азербайджан не будет терпеть, но Азербайджан хитрее и умнее.
Aliyev is a graduate of MGIMO, a man prepared for difficult and unpleasant situations. He is a representative of the Eastern political school, brought up by special services, and at MGIMO he was trained not for diplomacy or journalism, but for completely different tasks. He got his diploma deservedly. The confrontation between two people from special services, but Aliyev's multi-purpose moves work, while Putin's do not. In addition, Armenia is leaving the orbit of influence, and Russia does not know how to react. The only thing it knows how to do is to solve issues by force, kill, intimidate, use tanks, as in Prague in 1968, in Abkhazia, in Ukraine. But you cannot drive tanks into Armenia, just as you cannot drive into Azerbaijan. For Putin, this topic was not of interest from the beginning. He was not going to dialogue with Azerbaijan. But now it is possible to play a little tension, create the appearance of reaction, and in a week everything will be forgotten, both the victims and the scandal. Russia will again pretend that it is right.
Но здесь для Путина, в принципе, ему эта тема была не нужна, не интересна. Он не собирался с Азербайджаном ни о чем говорить. Но вот сейчас поиграть еще неделю, после которой все забудется, забудутся жертвы, забудутся погибшие, и Россия опять с неподражаемым лицом будет делать вид, что она во всем права.
This is a week of geopolitical interactions with Azerbaijan on unexpectedly escalated issues for which Russia was unprepared. Putin is never ready. His reaction is always delayed. Whatever happens, he realizes the consequences only after a while. That's why the express train to Baku flew past, and Putin just looked at it without realizing what had happened. When he was informed that it was an Azerbaijani problem, he simply nodded. Unlike Russia, America keeps a close eye on everything that happens in the world, from Greenland to the Caucasus. The U.S. presence in the region is not accidental, and it is especially noticeable by the American embassy in Yerevan, which looks imposing and symbolizes serious intentions. The U.S. has chances. It is ready to talk and listen. America is not threatening Yerevan or Baku with tanks, unlike Russia. This is especially painful for Putin. He is losing the Caucasus, but he is not ready to sit down at the table and systematically solve the Caucasus issue. Historically, Russia solved it with expeditionary corps. They came, destroyed it, and considered the region pacified. Putin is not ready for that yet, but he has no other tools.
Кавказский вопрос Россия, Российская империя решала всегда только экспедиционными корпусами. Прийти, поубивать всех и до какое-то время считать, что Кавказ как минимум усмирен. Вот к этому Путин пока не готов. Других вариантов у него нет.
Now it turns out Putin doesn't know how to respond to the killing of 2 Azerbaijanis in the police station. All he can do is have Maria Zakharova make an offhand comment. Maybe Medvedev will say something later, if he doesn't mix up Azerbaijan with another republic. The US seized the moment. Until recently, Washington wasn't really discussed in connection with Baku, especially compared to Yerevan. But now they've made their presence known. Unlike Russia, which seems lost, the US always finds a way to show up, even without direct leverage. That's key, to be present and heard. Russia's role in the Caucasus causes irritation. The US, by contrast, is met without resistance. Friends, leave your comments and questions for our guest. Don't forget to like this video. Sergei, a question from the viewer. Can Erdoğan intervene in this conflict and stand up for Aliyev?
вступить в этот весь конфликт Эрдоган? Может ли он заступиться за Алиева?
Эрдоган и Алиев – это два очень похожих человека.
Erdoğan and Aliyev are two very similar leaders. Like Trump and Putin, between whom it is easy to draw parallels, there are similarities here. Erdoğan is a strategist, and Aliyev is also a strategist. Azerbaijan is lucky in this sense. Although Aliyev is not loved by everyone, he inherited power through the dynastic line, but he has proven to be a strong player. He is known not only as a politician, but also as a man who made big bets in casinos, though he lost more often than not. In geopolitics, he acts with confidence and scale. Fina Ranevskaya's phrase, the kingdom is not big enough, there is nowhere to spread out, could well be addressed to him. The main thing is that he does not suffer from a small country complex and does not try to impose his leadership on the region, although he has all the abilities to do so. Erdoğan understands and appreciates this. Their alliance is not based on the principle of senior and junior, as is customary in Russian politics, where neighbors are looked down upon. Here it is a partnership on equal footing.
И Эрдоган это прекрасно понимает. И поэтому здесь союз не, как это принято в России, когда старший посматривает через губы и говорит, ну вы там вы кто там, украинцы, да, ха-ха, 3 раза, молдаване, государство себе построили, литовцы, да, Евросоюз.
There is no chauvinism and regal arrogance here, when all others are considered as nothing and should lie at their feet. This is not the case in relations between Azerbaijan and Turkey, despite the difference in potential. Turkey is a country that produces everything from weapons to food, fully self-sufficient. Turks wear their own clothes and shoes, know how to build and craft, and in general it is a self-sufficient nation. There are many signs of evolutionary development in Turkey that deserve attention and respect despite internal contradictions. Azerbaijan does not look as stable, but it is lucky to have a leader whom Erdogan sees not as a junior partner, not as a servant, but as an equal. This makes a big difference. The countries are not equal in scale, but the leaders are in the same weight class, and both realize this. So their alliance is built on mutual respect. In Slavic political culture, support is often expressed demonstratively, with shouting and ostentatious sacrifice. Here it is different, respect without theater.
В одной ценовой и весовой категории. И оба это знают. И поэтому вот так вот, ведь по-русски, вообще в славянском мире это же принято, как обычно показывается поддержка. Ну, когда вы прям в морду. Да я за тебя, и рубаху так вот, и тельняха на груди.
Ostentatiousness is not the style of the East. The East behaves differently. Although we are used to the image of Islamists who organize mass demonstrations, shout, burn flags, this is not the East. Things are different here. That's why the Americans appeared so quickly on the horizon. They realized that there is full understanding and close cooperation between Aliyev and Erdogan. They have no language barrier, unlike Americans. Everything is transparent and clear. Turkey perceives Azerbaijan as an equal, but it does so delicately, without demonstrating superiority, so as not to hurt feelings or upset the balance. There is no need to add extra weight to the scale when both sides are already valuable. This is a solid alliance of two strategists, capable of calculating moves several steps ahead, acting in full harmony. Such an alliance arouses interest in the United States and irritation in Russia, which looks confused and clumsy against this background.
Это очень интересно для Америки и в очередной раз раздражающий факт для России, который дуры на этом фоне.
Sergei, should Moscow be worried now if a new force independent of the Kremlin and hostile to its interests is forming on its southern borders? Can Azerbaijan seize the moment and try to sway the situation in border Dagestan? Russia has much more reason to worry because it is not tolerated by almost everyone who encounters it. It is lucky that the Mongols remain calm, although they too have accumulated grievances. The Chinese in the border areas are behaving more and more assertively, although this is not too noticeable in Moscow. And the former Soviet republics, Uzbeks, Tajiks, Kyrgyz, Kazakhs, Azeris, Armenians, Georgians, in the southern region demonstrate the same attitude toward Russia. Even in Armenia, where loyalty is maintained and Russian remains an everyday language, on the streets, in stores, in cabs, in hospitals, attitudes are changing. Armenia is leaving, and it has something to show Moscow. Putin's betrayal of Karabakh has not been forgotten. This is a region where memory is long, and no one forgives anything.
Союзная республика, сохранившая свою союзность и республиканство, она уходит подальше. И ей есть что предъявить России. И Армения прекрасно предательство Путина в отношении Карабаха знает и помнит. Этот регион, в котором никто ничего не забывает никогда.
This region remembers offenses that are 100, 200, 300 years old. Even events 4 centuries old are not forgotten, especially if they have not yet been avenged. All these republics, all independent states have tense relations with Russia. On the surface there are smiles, trade, diplomacy, but behind it lies a deep distrust. This is not just a stone in the hole, it is a diagnosis that has long been formed. Russia has as many hotbeds of tension as there are countries around it, plus its own republics, Dagestan, Chechnya, Ingushetia, and other regions of the Caucasus. Each of them has its own score to settle with Moscow, and the list of grievances is extensive. Azerbaijan and Turkey are on the agenda now, but tomorrow Tajikistan may come up. Uzbekistan also shows unfriendliness, and Kyrgyzstan is increasingly seeing a change of heart. Kazakhstan, on the other hand, has long shown distance, and in the Kremlin's view, it has never been a truly independent entity. Even natural disasters on its territory are perceived as something alien and unimportant. There is not an inch of Kazakh land that would not be considered Russian in the eyes of Russian chauvinists. This, too, is a source of tension. Kazakhstan now trains its officer corps at West Point in the United States, not at the Dzerzhinsky Academy, because it is clear who is now an ally and who is a threat. Russia has its own level of conflict with each neighboring country and republic. Somewhere it is smoldering, somewhere it is already burning, and somewhere tension is still building up. All this will sooner or later explode and turn against Russia itself. It does not know how to manage it. It is becoming increasingly difficult to analyze the situation, and it is impossible to recognize the experience of others. Russian political culture is dominated by arrogance, not to learn from others, but to demand obedience. Even in friendliness there is no sincerity. After a shot of vodka you can hug, but after 15 minutes everything goes back to normal. And in this context, Zbigniew Brzezinski's prediction sounds particularly relevant. When the Soviet Union collapses, the Caucasus will go separate, and this will be a turning point. Zbigniew Brzezinski, former U.S. Secretary of State, laid out in detail how the Caucasus would become a detonation point. In Russia, this has always been treated with arrogance. If anything, we will kill them all and be quiet. But for the countries of the region, the goal is not to defeat Russia, but to get rid of it, just to be left alone, not to interfere in the affairs of Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia. Even Dagestan, which is smoldering on its own, can flare up if it receives external support. This is an extremely heterogeneous region where there is no unity on either political or ideological lines. There can be supporters of any position. If, for example, Turkey decides to pay attention to instability in Dagestan, it can start acting with money, weapons, diplomatic presence, even just opening a consulate. This is not aggression, but a game of interest. But neither Turkey nor Azerbaijan seek conflict with Russia. Their goal is not fighting, not provocation, but calm. They want Russia to simply stop interfering.
например, оружием или чем бы то ни было, каким-нибудь элементом влияния, в конце концов, просто присутствием консульства своего, поиграем в эту игру. Нет, неинтересно. Потихонечку можно будет, если что, присмотреться к этому региону. А так, чтобы какой-то интерес, ни в коем случае. У Азербайджана, у Турции, у них нету задачи бороться с Россией, воевать с Россией, пакостить Россию.
Friends, write in the comments what you think, whether the Caucasus is cracking and what awaits Putin. And now, Sergei, I want to ask you about the actions of Donald Trump, who is called a friend of the Russian dictator. The US, as it has become known, has suspended deliveries of missiles and ammunition to Ukraine because of concerns about the state of its own military stockpile. This is reported by NBC News, with reference to the decision of Secretary of Defense Pete Hackett. We are talking about dozens of interceptors for Patriot, thousands of shells, more than 100 Hellfire missiles and other systems. This news comes amid Russia's heavy attacks on civilian targets in Ukraine. What do you think this decision is related to? Is it a refusal to support Ukraine, an attempt to induce it to capitulate, an attempt to play in Russia's interests, or is it still prioritizing its own needs and aggravating the situation in the Middle East?
И подыгрывание России, или все же это из-за собственных интересов и событий на Ближнем Востоке?
All wars, according to Trump, should be won only by him personally. No one else has the right to win. This is evident in the situation with Israel. The recent agreement on a 60-day truce in the Gaza Strip, which Trump reported as having been reached, effectively means that Israel's hands have been tied. Now all that remains is to get a similar agreement from Hamas. This is unacceptable because Israel cannot be prevented from winning. It is capable of dealing with the Gaza Strip on its own. Helping Israel is the duty of any civilized society, including the US. It is not a matter of diplomacy, it is a matter of survival. Israel is not acting out of political considerations, but out of necessity. As soon as it became clear that after pressure on Iran, Israel was focusing on Gaza and was close to a solution to the conflict, outside forces intervened. Israel was given the command to stop. In 60 days, Hamas will be able to rebuild its forces, replenish its arsenal, and then everything will start again. This is a signal. Israel must not win, because victory must belong to others. Only America has the right to win. Ukraine, in Washington's view, has gone too far. It recently struck Russian headquarters and facilities at great depth, using not American but British and German precision weapons. Russia was stunned and admitted it had not expected such capabilities. Ukraine has shown that given the means, it can win a war. But in Trump's logic, only he can be the winner. The US explains the supply freeze by the fact that they allegedly have stockpile problems. At the same time, Trump is constantly demanding that Europe buy more American weapons. This is causing a crisis of confidence. Germany urgently concluded a military alliance with France and the UK, despite the fact that the latter is not part of the EU. European countries have realized that Trump and America can no longer be counted on. War is near, and they will have to act on their own. America has become not just unreliable, but unpredictable and inadequate, and Trump deserves the credit for that.
Германия срочно заключила военный союз с Францией и с Великобританией, которые не входят в ЕС. Потому что на Трампа, на Америку теперь надежды нет никакой. А война на пороге, и стало понятно, что воевать придется уже без Америки. Поскольку Америка не просто ненадежная, Америка теперь невменяемая благодаря Трампу.
Europe is preparing for its own war, relying on its own forces. Although, as usual, it failed to act in time. Now it is too late, but even delayed action is better than complete inaction. The UK, despite leaving the EU, demonstrates that it remains part of the European space and recognizes the threats facing the continent. In the last World War, it was able to sit back on the islands, and despite German aggression, the English Channel remained an insurmountable barrier. The Second Front was opened from the territory of England, but not vice versa. Now the situation may be repeated. Britain may not be reached again. Although the British have lost their fighting skills, their geographical position still gives them an advantage. Nevertheless, they realize that the war affects them as well. Therefore, Britain signed a military cooperation agreement with Germany. A similar treaty is made between Germany and France. These three countries clearly realize that war is inevitable. America has nothing to do with it. Hungary and Slovakia, which block any resolutions and prevent Europe from becoming an independent power, no longer play a decisive role. Their influence is losing importance. Britain, France, and Germany, the three most economically developed and militarily strongest powers in Europe, know what to do, because they are no longer counting on America. If the US helps, good. If not, Europe can manage on its own. America is excluded from military and economic calculations because it has become an unreliable partner. Trump's behavior is destroying trust. The US is perceived as a traitor who cannot be relied upon. Therefore, decisions are now being made without Washington's input. America is running out of tools of influence. Israel has already been told to stop. It is being forced to pause so that Hamas can recover and continue its attacks. Israel has almost completed the operation, but now has to wait to give the enemy a break. That's why America is telling Israel to stop, but it can no longer dictate terms to Europe. Europe is realizing more and more clearly that Trump is dementia that has become politics. He can present any certificates about his health, talk about his incredible ability to work at the age of 79, but the reality says the opposite. We have gotten used to it and even stopped discussing it. But since when did the capriciousness and hysterical behavior of an elderly man stuck in self-aggrandizement become the foreign policy of an entire country? Now the whole world is discussing what Trump said, whether he was offended or upset. His mood becomes a factor in international decisions. US presidents used to be criticized, but it never got to the point where the behavior resembled an old man on the fence. Reagan had opponents. Carter was challenged. Nixon was criticized. Obama was debated, but no one questioned what leg they got up on or how their breakfast went.
Никсону были претензии, к Обаме тем более, но мы никогда не оценивали, а Обама сегодня с какой ноги встал? А Обама сегодня хорошо спал? А Байден? Байден сегодня позавтракал?
With Biden, everything went according to schedule. Documents were signed, decisions were made, and the aircraft carrier called America was on a steady course. Now it's chaos on the bridge. The helm is turning in different directions. The ship is tossing. An airplane is falling from the deck, or a missile is sinking, and all this is perceived as a norm. This is the President of the United States. The three largest economies in Europe, Germany, France, and Great Britain, have already said, "Thank you, we will take it from here." Ukraine, unfortunately, cannot say the same. We are trying to find some kind of calculation in Trump's actions, but instead of strategy, we hear kindergarten-level explanations. We don't have enough ourselves, we need to replenish warehouses. It sounds like a refusal to help at the most critical moment. But this is war. If we do not let Ukraine win now, then we will have to intervene directly, because the aggressor will not stop. And this used to be understood even by those who were not professionals, at the level of ministers, at the level of presidents. Nowadays, American politics is more and more like a sandbox game. Decisions are made on the principle of let's try it this way. We can see how the cooling of relations with Elon Musk is turning into an open confrontation. He is already being threatened with deportation, with insults along the lines of, "Go back to your South Africa and teach the locals how to manage the economy." Trump has promised to crack down on Musk with the very department he himself created, a structure designed to suppress any sprouts of dissent. Now this machine, which has ground up part of the US management system, is turning against its creator. This is reminiscent of the fate of the NKVD leaders, none of whom survived: Yezhov, Yagoda, Beria. All of them built the system, believed they could control it, but in the end, they became its victims. Musk finds himself in a similar situation. He created a tool that is now turning against him, and it seems to be working effectively. This chaos in the US is leaving Ukraine vulnerable, hindering Israel, and Europe, by contrast, is beginning to recover. Putin has gotten European countries to reconsider their relations, build coalitions outside the EAEU, and NATO is finally waking up.
Он теперь очень сильно мешает Израилю. А Европа уже потихонечку излечилась. И Путин, он добился того, что и в Европе теперь пересматривают взаимоотношения, когда страны создают свои коалиции вопреки ЕС.
Donald Trump not only suspended arms supplies to Ukraine, but also lifted sanctions against a number of Russian companies and banks, including Rosoboronexport. After he lifted restrictions related to Syria on July 1st, Russian structures were also removed from the sanctions lists. The ban was lifted from several banks, as well as from the head of Kalmykia, who was accused of supporting the Assad regime. Sergei, can the lifting of sanctions formally related to Syria be used as a legal pretext for easing pressure on Russia? Angela Merkel wrote in her book that Trump admires Putin and viewed him as a model leader. Nothing has changed since then. Older politicians rarely revise their sympathies. If Trump once developed a liking for Putin, he is unlikely to abandon that image. He will not turn away from the portrait he himself hung on the wall. Therefore, despite attempts to catch signs of cooling in the rhetoric, everything points to the fact that the mainstream remains pro-Russian. Moreover, some of the techniques and political moves characteristic of Putin are beginning to emerge in Trump. Their approaches increasingly coincide. Even on the issue of the Taliban, there are similarities. For Putin, they are no longer terrorists, but partners. Before the Economic Forum in St. Petersburg, their status was changed from terrorists to political actors. This gesture has become part of a common line in which Trump and Putin are increasingly acting in unison.
И они тоже перед экономическим форумом в Санкт-Петербурге, который был несколько недель тому назад, поменяли статус с террористов на обычных талибов.
The Taliban, literally translated, are students. Young people with Kalashnikovs, wearing flip-flops and long beards, who supposedly come to study, for example, economics. Putin defiantly removed them from terrorist status, presenting it as a political decision. Immediately, Trump picks up on it. Great idea. In Riyadh, he shook hands with the chief militant, then declared him a handshake and reliable partner. An organization that until recently was considered a terrorist organization is now, according to Trump's version, a stable economic ally. Moreover, he said that interfaith and interethnic harmony has been established in this country, despite the fact that the whole world has seen Alawites being slaughtered in the streets just for practicing another branch of Islam. American TV stations showed these scenes, but Trump chose to ignore them. He lifted sanctions and proclaimed the advent of peace. Putin did the same when he justified the Taliban, and if Putin makes another absurd decision tomorrow, Trump will likely mirror it and say, "Great idea, Volodya, you're a genius. This is no longer politics, it's a farce."
Наконец-то благоденствие наступило. А то же самое и Путин говорил по поводу Талибана, который ни в коем случае не террорист. Сейчас Путин тоже позволит себе какую-нибудь дичь, и выяснится, что Трамп и ее отзеркалил и сказал: отличная идея. Володя, ты молодец. Какие у тебя многоходовочки, мне тоже нравятся.
Sergei, lastly, I would like to ask why French President Macron called Putin. Everyone is now discussing this conversation, and the conclusion is the same. Macron just wasted his time, because nothing new was said. This was unexpected, since for a long time it seemed Macron was in regular contact with Putin. French media and the president's office often reported that he called Putin almost weekly. It looked like an ongoing dialogue. Macron brews tea, dials Putin, and urges him to behave. Putin, in turn, supposedly listens and thanks him for the support. But now it turns out Macron hasn't called him in 2.5 years. The last conversation was long ago. The image of constant contact was just that, an image. This was presented as heroism. France was supposedly in the spotlight, at least in its own mind. Look at Emmanuel Macron, so determined that he went to a phone booth and called Putin himself, a conversation about which no one will know anything, no details, but the impression is that he called last week and will call next week. In fact, he didn't. He didn't even go near the phone booth, and now he has called, and the conversation has been reduced to a geography lesson. Putin asks, "Do you know Iran?" "I do." "Do you know about the Middle East?" "I know." "Have you heard about the Houthis in Yemen?" "I have." "Well, goodbye then." The conversation came up empty. In politics, such calls look like an act of narcissism and a way to make headlines. The leader of the nation supposedly climbed resolutely to the top, looked beyond the horizon, came down and said that everything was shining and shimmering up there, and that's where we should go. Great, except we had a clue without him. On the internet, under every post, arguments unfold, where people argue, hate each other, most often without arguments. The main goal is not to understand the interlocutor, but to impose their point of view at any cost. Conviction in one's own rightness becomes an aggressive form of communication. In the Russian-speaking segment, it often ends in insults and personal attacks. And it almost never happens that someone changes his or her opinion as a result of the discussion. At most, a person admits that there are other views, but it is practically impossible to change their mind or reorient their interlocutor in the course of a dispute.
Максимум он просто примет к сведению, что существуют какие-то другие точки зрения. То есть не получится в беседе, в дискуссии перевоспитать человека, переориентировать человека.
This doesn't sound like a serious discussion. In psychiatry, it takes long-term therapy, medication, and years of observation to change a person's behavior. Even then, the result is only partial stabilization. To influence a person by talking on the phone is an illusion. To change someone's mind, to stop a war with a single phone call, is from the realm of fantasy. Like Trump, I'm going to make a phone call and everything will change. It doesn't work that way. It's like an argument on the internet. You write your arguments and your opponent suddenly says, "Right, I didn't know, thanks, now I'm different." But that doesn't happen. Even in a family where people live together for years, quarrels do not end with a complete victory of one side. Husband and wife argue, break the furniture, but everyone stays to his own. Sometimes the corners are smoothed out, but the puzzles still don't fit. And here's a politician on the phone, hoping for a result. In rare cases, like when Chernomyrdin called Basayev, it had a specific purpose. But in most cases, it is just a gesture, nothing more. There was indeed something to negotiate about then, but that does not change the fact that negotiations with terrorists are unacceptable. The conversation between Chernomyrdin and Basayev was a complete fiasco for the Russian authorities and Chernomyrdin personally. Those who understood remained silent while others admired him. They said he was a hero. He called Basayev himself. This call had no effect. Macron's call to the current Basayev also led nowhere. Still, everyone is talking. France, the US, you, me. So the Moscow, like in the fable, reached the phone booth and made a bold call. When Scholz tried the same, Putin didn't even pick up. No result, just public embarrassment, but plenty of noise. Look, our Kaiser can press buttons too. He called Putin. True, Putin didn't answer. He was on another call. But still, a hero. Like Macron. A real hero. Friends, leave your comments and don't forget to like this video. Let me remind you that Sergei Aslanyan was on the line with us. Thank you very much for your opinion. Please subscribe to our YouTube channels, to Sergei's channel, to Glory to Us the 24th, and to my personal channel. Thank you for your attention. I wish you only good news. See you soon. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.
Всем спасибо за внимание, желаю хороших новостей и до встречи.
Слава Украине!
Героям слава!